His hand was on her arm at 7:43. She was back at the podium at 9:15. In between, 90 minutes that the Kellerman Foundation's annual leadership gala would talk about for years. 90 minutes in which the most expensive ballroom in Cincinnati, crystal chandeliers, Carrara marble floors, 300 guests in black tie, went from a room that had just watched a security guard escort a black woman out through a side door to a room standing on its feet for the same woman at a mahogany podium. 90 minutes. What happened in them? In the lobby, in the parking garage, in 3 phone calls and 1 very quiet conversation that nobody outside a service corridor on the 2nd floor of the Kellerman Grand Hotel witnessed, is the story that changed everything. Her name was Dr. Celine Adeyemi, and she had known, from the moment she walked in, exactly how this night was going to go. Rewind 8 hours. This is where it starts. Celine had spent the afternoon in her hotel room 3 blocks away, the kind of room she always booked for speaking engagements, not the suite, not the standard, the middle option that was comfortable without being conspicuous. Because she had learned across 23 years of keynote addresses at institutions ranging from regional nonprofits to the United Nations Economic Commission that the speakers who arrived in town car convoys and penthouse suites were rarely the speakers that audiences remembered most. She had learned this the way she learned everything, by paying close attention to the difference between what impressed people and what changed them. She was 56 years old. She had a doctorate in organizational leadership from Northwestern and an undergraduate degree in social work from Kentucky State that she had finished in 3 years while working nights at a community health center in Lexington, where she had grown up. The youngest daughter of a Baptist minister and a high school principal who had raised 3 children in a house where the phrase "be about it" was the answer to most problems and the only answer to the important ones. She had spent 23 years as a leadership consultant, speaker, and organizational change strategist. She had advised 31 nonprofit and civic organizations through significant structural transitions. She had written 4 books, the most recent of which, The Weight of the Room, Leadership, Race, and the Art of Being Seen, had been on 3 bestseller lists and had been described in a review in the Harvard Business Review as the most practically useful leadership text published this decade. She had given approximately 400 keynote addresses. She remembered most of them. She forgot none of the rooms that had made her wait outside them longer than was necessary. She remembered those very specifically. The Kellerman Foundation's Gala was the organization's 25th anniversary celebration. The foundation funded civic leadership development programs across 12 Ohio cities. Its board was composed of 17 members, 15 of them white, 12 of them male, a demographic profile that was not unusual for its age and type, and that Celine had noted without judgment when she reviewed the foundation materials. Because the profile was not the point. What the foundation funded was the point, and what it funded was, by the evidence of its program outcomes, genuinely good work. She had been booked for the keynote 8 months earlier. The contract had been signed. The wire transfer for her speaking fee, $28,000, which was her standard rate for a 90-minute keynote, a number that her speaking agency had set and that she had never once negotiated downward, had cleared 4 weeks prior. Her name was in the program. Her name was on the large printed banner in the gala's foyer, which she had walked past when she arrived for the afternoon sound check. She had done the sound check at 4 o'clock. She had met the event director, a young man named Jordan, who ran the logistics with the focused anxiety of someone managing a complex operation at a very high standard, and who had walked her through the evening schedule with the precision of someone who had done this before and intended to do it without incident. She had gone back to her hotel room. She had changed into the midnight silk dress she wore for formal keynotes. Not because formality required it, but because she had learned that audiences seated at $500 a plate galas needed a visual signal that the person at the podium understood the room. And the silk dress provided that signal, while costing her nothing she wasn't already comfortable spending. She had reviewed her notes, which were not notes exactly, but the 3-page framework of questions and provocations she used to anchor her remarks, which she delivered without reading because she had been thinking about these ideas for 23 years, and the thinking never stopped. She had arrived at the Kellerman Grand at 7:27. She had been escorted out at 7:43, 16 minutes. The event had a pre-dinner reception beginning at 7 o'clock. Celine had not been expected at the reception. Keynote speakers typically arrived closer to the program's start, which Jordan had told her was 8:30. But she had arrived early, as she always did, because early meant she could walk the room before it was full and understand the space and the energy before it was required to receive her. The reception was in the Kellerman Grand's Crystal Room, adjacent to the main ballroom, connected through a set of gilded doors that opened at 8 for the transition to dinner and program. The Crystal Room, Waterford chandeliers, gold leaf ceiling moldings, champagne service from trays carried by staff in white jackets. 300 guests moving in the particular choreography of formal pre-event networking. The clusters of familiar conversations and the more deliberate orbits of people seeking the conversations they'd come for. Celine moved through the room quietly, not performing invisibility. Simply not performing visibility yet, because the keynote was 2 hours away and she had learned that the best speakers arrived to the stage with something to give rather than something to sustain. She was near the east wall, observing the room, when a hand closed around her arm. Not firmly, not violently, with the professional certainty of someone executing a clear instruction in the belief that the instruction was correct. She turned. Security, a young man in a dark jacket, event credentials clipped to his lapel, with the expression of someone who had been told to remove an uncredentialed guest from the pre-event space and was now executing that instruction. "Ma'am," he said, "I need to see your event credential." She looked at him. She looked at his hand on her arm. She said, with the particular composure of a woman who has been in rooms that did not expect her for 23 years, "I'm the keynote speaker." The young man's expression did not change. "I'm going to need to see your credential badge." Here is what had happened. The event credentials, the laminated badges that identified keynote speakers and VIP guests and distinguished them from general admission, had been distributed at check-in. Jordan's team had left hers at the check-in desk to be collected when she arrived. She had entered through the speaker's entrance at the hotel's south side, where a staff member had escorted her to the sound check, and in the 4-hour gap between the sound check and her return, the credential had remained at the check-in desk uncollected. She did not have it. She had $28,000 in a wire, transferred speaking fee, and her name on a banner in the foyer, and a program with her biography and the title of her keynote address. She did not have the laminated badge. She told him her name. She told him she was scheduled to give the keynote at 8:30. She told him to please contact Jordan, the event director, who would confirm everything in under 60 seconds. The security guard. He was 23 years old, 8 months into his event security role, following a protocol that said uncredentialed guests in the pre-event space were to be removed promptly and without extended negotiation. Because extended negotiation created scenes, and scenes were the thing the protocol existed to prevent, looked at her for a moment. He was not malicious. He was not a bad person. He was a young man who had been given a protocol and had not been given the judgment to know when the protocol required overriding. He did not contact Jordan. He escorted her out. The side door through which Celine was escorted opened onto a service corridor that ran along the hotel's second floor, connecting the event spaces to the freight elevator and the staff areas. It smelled of industrial cleaning solution and fresh linen. Fluorescent lights. The sound of the ballroom kitchen 2 doors down. She stood in the service corridor for 10 seconds after the door closed behind her. 10 seconds. She had a method, in moments of elevated emotion, of counting to 10 before doing anything, not as a calming technique, but as a measurement. She had discovered in her 30s that 10 seconds was the precise interval between a reaction and a response, and that she had never once regretted waiting for the response. She counted. Then she took out her phone. Her first call was to Jordan. He answered on the 3rd ring in the distracted tone of someone managing 17 things simultaneously. When she told him what had happened, his voice went through 3 distinct registers in approximately 2 seconds. Surprise, recognition, and then the specific, high-pitched urgency of an event director understanding that his keynote speaker is standing in a service corridor 47 minutes before the program begins. "Oh God," he said. "Stay where you are. I'm coming." "I'm not staying where I am," she said calmly. "I'm going to be in the lobby in 3 minutes, but I need you to understand what happened before you fix it. Because how you fix it matters." Jordan was quiet for a moment, the briefest, most instructive silence of the evening. "Yes," he said. "You're right. Tell me." She told him. Everything. The credential, the guard, the hand on her arm, the 16 minutes between her arrival and the corridor. She told it in the flat, factual tone she used when delivering information that required accuracy over emotion. When she finished, Jordan said, "I am deeply sorry. This is my failure. The credential was at the desk, and I should have flagged your arrival personally. I should have been there." A pause. "What do you need?" She had already decided. "I need to come back in," she said, "through the main entrance." With an introduction. Another pause. Longer. Jordan was smart enough to understand what she was saying, and smart enough to understand that it was correct. "I'll tell the chairman," he said. Her second call was to her speaking agency's emergency line, standard protocol when an event situation developed that might affect a contract. She left a brief voicemail, factual, time-stamped. She had learned long ago that the events you documented were the events you controlled the narrative of. Her third call was to herself, which is to say, she did not make a third call. She stood in the lobby of the Kellerman Grand Hotel for 40 minutes, in the midnight silk dress, watching the guests move through the crystal room doors and then the ballroom doors. And she thought about what she was going to say, not the keynote. The keynote was already prepared, had been prepared for weeks, refined across the afternoon, and was sitting in her body in the specific way that things you have thought about for 23 years sit in you. Available and immediate. She was not going to change the keynote. She was going to add something to the beginning. 1 paragraph. She drafted it in her head, the way she drafted everything, whole cloth, no revision, because revision required paper, and she had none, and because the thing she wanted to say was not complicated. She knew what the room needed to hear. She always did. That was why they paid her $28,000. At 9:08, the Kellerman Foundation's chairman, a man named Robert Ashcraft, 70 years old, silver-haired, the kind of bearing that comes from 40 years of civic leadership, appeared in the main ballroom lobby and walked to where Celine was standing. He was accompanied by Jordan, whose face bore the specific expression of a man who has spent the past hour doing the most important crisis management of his professional life and is not yet certain it's going to be enough. Robert Ashcraft extended his hand. He held her gaze, steady, without flinching, with the specific quality of a man who has decided that this moment requires his full, unmediated attention and is going to receive it. "Dr. Adeyemi," he said, "I owe you an apology, a real one." He did not rush past it. What happened tonight should not have happened. The failure was in our preparation and our systems, and the harm was real. "I'm sorry." Celine looked at him. She had received 1,000 apologies in her career. Institutional apologies, procedural apologies, the carefully constructed apologies of organizations that had decided accountability was the best risk management strategy. She knew the difference between those and an apology from a person who was actually, in this moment, sorry. This was the second kind. "Thank you," she said. "I accept it." She paused. "I also want to say this. The young man who escorted me out was following a protocol. The protocol was the problem. He was given a rule and not the judgment to know when the rule required overriding. That's a leadership failure. It's not his." Robert Ashcraft nodded. Slowly, the nod of a man receiving information he is going to carry somewhere. "I'd like to address the room," Celine said. "Before the keynote." "Of course," he said. "Not about what happened to me specifically," she said. "I'd like to address it as an example of a broader pattern. The way our systems and structures make certain people visible and certain people invisible. And what that costs us as organizations and as a society. If the room will allow it." Robert Ashcraft looked at her for a moment. His expression had moved past apology into something else, the particular quality of attention that a person gives when they realize they are in the presence of someone who is going to say something worth hearing. "Dr. Adeyemi," he said, "that is exactly what we invited you here to do." She nodded. Jordan said, "It's 9:12. Dinner's wrapped. The program was supposed to start at 8:30. He paused. "They've been waiting." "Good," Celine said. She had learned, across 23 years, that rooms that have been kept waiting are rooms that have been thinking. Thinking rooms listen differently from rooms that arrived on schedule. The 45 minutes the ballroom had spent at dinner with no program, with no explanation yet, with the low current of something having gone wrong humming through the tables. Those 45 minutes had primed the room in ways that no planned pause could have produced. She walked to the ballroom doors. Jordan held them. She went in. The room felt her before it saw her. Not because she announced herself. She had not asked for an announcement, had specifically asked Jordan to simply open the doors and let her walk to the podium. She had her reasons. She always had her reasons. 300 guests at 40, 7 tables of 8. Crystal and candlelight and the white linen of tables cleared of dinner service. The particular attentive energy of an audience that has been waiting longer than expected and is now, at 9:15, leaning forward in the specific way of people who understand that something has happened and are ready to learn what it was. She walked to the podium. She set her notes down. She looked at the room. She let the room look at her. 7 seconds. She had a technique. She called it the 7-second arrival, and she had taught it in leadership seminars for 15 years. The willingness to stand in front of a room and simply be there before speaking. To let the room understand that you are not in a hurry, that you have something worth saying and are going to say it on your own terms and at your own pace. Most speakers could not do it. 7 seconds of silence in front of 300 people required a specific relationship with your own authority, the understanding that the silence was not empty, but full, that you were filling it simply by standing there. Celine Adeyemi had that relationship. 7 seconds. Then she said, "I was escorted out of this building 90 minutes ago." The room did not gasp. It went the kind of still that is more powerful than a gasp. The stillness of 300 people choosing, simultaneously and without coordination, to be completely present. She told them. Calmly, precisely, in the same flat, factual tone she had used with Jordan. She did not perform distress. She did not perform dignity, which is different from having it. She described what had happened, the way she described everything, as information, with the details in order, with the reasoning visible. She told them about the credential, about the protocol, about the young man following his instructions without the judgment to know when instructions require overriding. She told them that she was not there to condemn him. She was there to use what had happened as a frame for what she had driven to Cincinnati to talk about, which was the way organizations build structures that make certain people invisible, and the cost of that invisibility, and the specific thing that leadership required in response. She said, "I spent 23 years helping organizations become more effective. In 23 years, I have never once walked into a building where the systems were designed to exclude people and found that the exclusion was making the organization better. Not once. The exclusion is always costing something. The question is only whether the organization is willing to look at what." The room was completely still. She looked at the tables, at the faces, attentive, some of them uncomfortable, some of them doing the visible work of recognition that happens when a person hears something they have known and not named. She looked at Robert Ashcraft at the head table, who was watching her with the sustained, undefended attention of a man in the process of recalibrating. She said, "Tonight cost your organization something. The credential failure, the protocol gap, the 90 minutes. But it also gave you something. It gave you a concrete example of the exact problem I came here to talk about. The gap between what an organization says it values and what its systems actually do. Your organization funds leadership development for 12 Ohio cities. Tonight, a gap in your own systems made the person you hired to talk about leadership invisible. That is not a coincidence. That is the lesson." She paused. "The question is what you do with it." She delivered the keynote for 64 minutes after that. The full address, the research, the framework, the case studies, the specific organizational change methodology she had spent 23 years developing and testing and refining. She did not rush. She did not abbreviate. She gave the room everything she had prepared, because the room had earned it by waiting and by listening and by doing the visible, difficult work of hearing something about themselves that was true and uncomfortable and necessary. When she finished, the silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Robert Ashcraft stood. Then the table beside him stood. Then 300 people were on their feet, and the sound in the Carrara marble ballroom of the Kellerman Grand Hotel was the particular sound of a room that has been genuinely moved, not performed applause, not reflexive social courtesy, but the full-bodied, involuntary response of people who have heard something that is going to stay with them. She stood at the podium and let it land. She had earned it. All of it. In the 48 hours following the gala, the Kellerman Foundation moved faster than most foundations of its size move, which was a credit to Robert Ashcraft and to the board members who had been in that room and had taken the 90-minute lesson at its word. The security protocol was revised within 24 hours, not just the credential process, the entire visitor management framework, updated with a layered verification system and explicit guidance on the use of judgment over procedure when the two conflicted. Jordan led the revision, because he had both the operational knowledge and the motivation of a man who had spent the worst 45 minutes of his professional life managing the consequences of a system failure and had no intention of repeating it. The young security guard, his name was Marcus, and he was 23 years old, and he had spent the night after the gala unable to sleep in the specific way of someone who is running a thing over and over and finding it looks different each time. Received a call from Jordan the following morning. Not a reprimand. A conversation. Jordan explained what had happened and why and what the protocol gap had been, and he asked Marcus what he had been thinking in the moment. And what, knowing what he knew now, he wished he had done differently. Marcus answered honestly. He said he had seen a woman without a badge and had followed his instructions. He said that when she told him she was the keynote speaker, he hadn't known how to evaluate the claim without the credential, and that the protocol hadn't told him. Jordan said, "That's the gap. The protocol has to tell you." Marcus said, "Yeah." They were on the phone for 37 minutes. At the end of it, Jordan had the information he needed for the protocol revision, and Marcus had the understanding of his role that the original training had not provided. He continued in the role. He became, over the following year, the member of the events team most likely to stop and ask whether a procedure made sense before executing it. The Kellerman Foundation requested Celine Adeyemi for its next annual gala. She accepted. The speaking fee was $34,000, her new standard rate adjusted for the year. Her credential was waiting at the speaker's entrance when she arrived. Jordan was standing next to it. She smiled at him. He looked like he had aged 2 years in 12 months, the specific aging that comes not from hardship, but from growth, which requires different muscles than comfort and costs more in the short term. "Dr. Adeyemi," he said. "Jordan," she said. She walked in through the speaker's entrance. She did the sound check. She went back to her hotel room and reviewed her framework. She returned to the Kellerman Grand at 7:15, not 7:27, earlier this time, because she wanted to see the crystal room before it was full. Her credential was on a lanyard around her neck. She didn't need it. Everyone in the building knew who she was, but she wore it anyway, because credentials mattered and protocols mattered, and the point was not that she was above the systems, but that the systems needed to be built well enough to see everyone clearly, including her. And wearing the lanyard was the simplest way to demonstrate that she understood the difference. She moved through the crystal room quietly, listening, watching, absorbing the room the way she always did before she was required to address it. At 9 o'clock, the ballroom doors opened. She walked to the podium. She set down her notes. She looked at the room. She let the room look at her. 7 seconds. She had all the time in the world.